All right, what's up, everybody? So let's dive right into it. So this week there's been a lot. We had the inauguration of Donald J. Trump as the president for a second time of the United States. We also saw a huge announcement around investment from the United States in AI infrastructure. But more interestingly, at least for me, was what was happening on the eastern part of our planet, whereby China was experiencing an influx of American users or US users from TikTok, aka TikTok refugees, over to Xiaohongshu, which is a Chinese social media app, which stands for Rednote or Little Red Book. So with that, I saw a lot of really interesting things at play. I think what I saw was the dominance of Chinese culture and now their outputs in terms of technology versus sort of the clutching of the straws from the United States. And again, this is a perception from the outside looking in, but also somebody who has been raised with Western education system and outlook, etc. But the United States shows all of the signs of an empire in decline. And people like Ray Dalio, if you haven't heard of him, highly recommend you check out his work. He's an American investor, but has talked about this, how the rise and fall of empires often are quite predictable. And there are a lot of things that often happen that the United States has been showcasing. Now, the tweet that you see here on screen, I'm just going to highlight it. This tweet is reflective of what happened with Deepseek, which is an AI LLM model from a Chinese group that has seemingly come out of nowhere, right? And this is more for Westerners, because it has essentially proven itself to be as effective or maybe even more effective than some of the most popular LLMs that are currently out in the market. So DeepSeek R1, as you can see here, has made things cheaper than a cup of coffee, as Greg Eisenberg has said, and is outperforming Cloud 3.5 Sonnet and GPT-4. So it is interesting because this aspect of made in China, right? A few decades ago, this used to be synonymous with cheap and low quality. But China has proven that it can do things cheaply, but also be of high quality. And it's really interesting to see because a lot more people are preferring Chinese products now because they're not just cheaper than American products, but they are also highly affordable. And I think with inflation prices going up and really having things feel tightened for a lot of folks in the West, if you contrast that with the experiences people are having in China, it's a whole different ballgame. So let's have a look, right, while we're here, at just some of the tweets and things that are coming through. It's super fascinating to see, right, that what has happened is that a lot of Americans have gone over to this app called Xiaohongshu, and they've realized that they essentially were being lied to by their own government. And this is a real big eye-opener, right? Because I think a lot of folks, and this has been my perspective too, that in the United States, a lot of folks have been used to the sort of Cold War or post-Cold War sentiments around China and the Chinese Communist Party, right? Not realizing that a lot has actually changed since that time period. That essentially the Chinese have taken what is uniquely theirs and their values and combine it with the best of what they've seen around the world. So yes, they do have some communist policies, but in other areas, they are far exceeding Western countries in their own game, right? If we look at capitalistic culture or values or even behaviors, there are many Chinese entrepreneurs who I would argue are even more capitalistic than some Americans or Europeans that I've met. And they've been able to figure out how to get a balance of what their people need, the communities, and the needs from a prosperity standpoint. And with essentially, what is it? Oh, however many billions they have, right? It might be like 1.3 billion, something crazy like that, right? The United States has about a population of 300 million, and I think China has like 1.3 or something of the sort, and they might have just recently been surpassed by India. But you can see with all of these tweets, right? Have a look at this. Xiaohongshu opened a window for Americans to learn more about China by directly interacting with Chinese people. Direct cultural exchange. These exchanges also seem to be sparking an even deeper appreciation among locals for their own systems. An all-around massive PR fail for U.S. government propagandists. And the funny thing is that if you listen to a lot of Americans in the past who haven't experienced this sort of migration over to Xiaohongshu from TikTok, many of them have been led to believe that China was a backward country, right? And they essentially didn't take care of their people, and they were only just kind of parroting what they've either heard on the news or read in the newspaper, if you still read newspapers. And I think it's been great for people to see themselves and interact with Chinese citizens on an app like Xiaohongshu to really understand what is going on, and what some folks like myself and others who've actually traveled to places in Asia and Africa and, just anywhere around the world outside of the United States. It's always better and easier to get firsthand knowledge and experience from these other places when you're talking about any of these issues, because otherwise you just come off as ignorant, right? And as we know, you cannot trust everything that you read or see online these days, right? So even with this, I can understand if some people are watching this, they probably don't believe it. They might still be in denial and think that like, oh yeah, all these videos and people on Xiaohongshu are just all fake, they're robots, they're not real. But again, if you've been to China, you'll know that this stuff is true, okay? So yeah, that is on Xiaohongshu side. Let's go back to Deepseek. Right? Now, since I'm somebody who is in the tech space, but I'm always looking at sort of what the cultural trends or influences are and how that is impacting communities, it's fascinating for me to see what's going on here, because despite the U.S. now pouring in about $500 billion, so this was announced by Trump earlier this week, right? They're looking at investing heavily into AI infrastructure for the United States, a total of $500 billion. And they've called it Project Stargate. Okay? Very fitting. I think I wrote here, yeah, definitely massive, because Stargate does remind me of the movie of the same name. And if any of you have watched that, you'll know how cool it is. And also, considering we're getting all these UFO disclosures, maybe there was truth behind it all the time, and that's maybe why I resonated with it back in the 90s. So yeah, here we've got Project Stargate, okay? And essentially this is the US's answer to what seems to be very strong dominance showing from China with their affordability and their technological, I won't say superiority, but they're coming up fast. And I think the United States, in many ways, they're copying China, even if they don't realize they're copying China. And what do I mean by that? So, one of the guys that was actually put onto the team that is working with Donald Trump on the AI infrastructure investments is Larry Ellison, who is the CEO of Oracle. And it's interesting because I haven't seen this guy in a while, but he was on TV or with Trump in some of the videos that were aired, along with Sam Altman from OpenAI and a few others. But in this video, it was kind of interesting to watch. Right? So let's see if we can play this.
We're constantly recording, watching and recording everything that's going on. Citizens will be on their best behavior, because we're constantly recording and reporting everything that's going on, and it's unimpeachable. The cars have cameras on them.
Okay, I'm going to pause there because essentially what summarizes this clip is that I think Larry sees what the future looks like with AI, and essentially it's a future that China is already in. Right? The West was often criticizing China for the amount of surveillance that it had on the entire country. They're talking about the social credit scoring system, what have you. Not realizing that some of these things already exist in other countries, including the United States. But I guess the Chinese weren't hiding the fact that they were doing this. And if anything, it's proven that they have been able to scale the technology, say from a surveillance standpoint, to take care of everybody in China in a way that they don't have to worry about violence. Something that I think the United States experiences way too much of under the guise of freedom, right? So there are cultural elements at play that are impacting the choices from each of these countries, right? I think we're seeing the extreme side that in the United States, you can call freedom or shout freedom to the point of anarchy, right? And I think one of my favorite quotes is, freedom without self-discipline is essentially, chaos, purposelessness, and anarchy. Because that tends to be what occurs. Whereas in China, I think they realize this, and they operate with a deep history as a power in that part of the world that has had many emperors, okay, and empresses. And so they can really pull on their own culture and values to take in the best that the world has to offer, but make it truly their own. The United States, they're a young nation relative to many other parts of the world. And so they've always had a very innovative, free type of value set, but there is a dark side to any value, right? There are positives and negatives. Because I think when you go to any extreme of any value, it becomes not healthy anymore. So this was Oracle's Larry Ellison, and what he was talking about in this video is essentially what China has already been doing. And I think what's fascinating to me is that a lot of these billionaires are actually talking to the US and sharing things with them that reflect actually what China has already been doing. The other one that I will share with you is I think Elon Musk talked about wanting X to be like WeChat. So I put WhatsApp, but it's actually WeChat. So let's see if we can find this tweet. So here, this was 2024, but I think there was a time way earlier where Elon Musk said he wanted to copy and turn Twitter into WeChat. In China, WeChat is a social media app as well as China's digital wallet. If you're blacklisted by social credit system and you WeChat bans you from blah, blah, blah. Okay, so we can see here, right, that this is something that already exists, and many American US billionaires are wanting to replicate it because it works at scale. You can't deny it. So let's now take a look at the next. So we had the $500 billion investment announcement for Project Stargate. Let's have a look at this. Okay, actually, let's talk about this tweet. So this tweet here. Shanghai will open up the global internet so that its citizens will have access to X, Facebook, and all other American ecosystem. China is now so advanced and its young people so sophisticated that the Chinese government is not worried about it. Okay, so I know that the language here is obviously very biased towards China, and I'm always mindful of this whenever reading anything, right? But I do like to look at both sides of any issue or event to see what's going on, because sometimes the truth is more of an average, right, of all viewpoints. So here, the news is that essentially China will be opening up some of its cities so that it has access to more American or international applications. And I think the reason it can do this is because it's done enough from a cultural value standpoint and its foundations that it knows what it has, and it's easier to open up. As somebody who's been involved in change management, looking at what China is doing is actually really systematic and quite brilliant, if you think about it, because they've been able to do things in their own way. They have been able to understand the nuances of cycles, right? So they had a time where they became really closed, which is where the United States is at the moment, where they're kind of becoming a little bit more insular, but they need to, because they have to take care of itself before they can even think about taking care of others, right? And I think this is where the issue has been for the United States, whereby a lot of folks have been criticizing the amount of funds going into Ukraine, to Israel, to a whole bunch of other different countries. Meanwhile, people in their own country are homeless, suffering, not able to afford basic groceries and, rent. And that's a big deal. Whereas in China, it looks like they've focused first on their people, and they have prioritized and optimized for that, and so that the basics are taken care of. And then they're starting to open up after those foundations have been sort of reset. Again, a lot of my perspectives or opinions on this is based on what I have observed. If there are any counterpoints that you have or you'd like to share, please put it in the comments below, because I'd love to hear it. I'm always open to other people's viewpoints and perspectives. And of course, if you have any sources, please provide them. And even if those sources are in Chinese or Mandarin, send those through too, and I can just use a translator, right, to read that. But I think, what I'm seeing here is that we're getting a lot more cross-cultural exchanges. The world, of course, has had a lot of this in the past, but I think when you see two superpowers and their people starting to engage with each other as a result of sort of political events or policy decision makers, so, like with TikTok, right, if we're going back to Xiaohongshu, okay, there's another tweet I can't get now, but on Xiaohongshu, that resulted due to the US wanting to ban TikTok, right? So even though it backfired, it was brilliant for the people to be able to sort of come together and exchange and learn from each other. That's the best way. Okay, so in the final tweet, this one is from Chamath. If you're not familiar with him, he's another famous investor, very active on Twitter. But here, this is about Deepseek. And again, I'm going back and forth between sort of the American technologies and the Chinese technologies to show you the different paths that they're taking, right? The United States seems to be taking more, bigger focus on ourselves, right? Whereas China is in a position where they've done everything that they've needed to locally at home, and they can start to open up now, but also show how they can make things way more affordable than their American counterparts, and appeal to the general masses, right? And I think that was part of the issue for the United States, even between the left and right, whereby I think from the Democrat side, it seemed like American citizens were no longer feeling like the Democrats were reflecting the average American, because it became more of an elitist thing, right? And so it looks like Donald Trump was able to appeal to the other side, to the Republicans, because they're more conservative and they're more focused on what's at home, right? And I think that's perfectly valid. For any country, there's a time to expand, but then there's also a time to contract and get your house in order. So here back at Deepseek, right? These are the results. I think a lot of people are really impressed with it. And Chama was talking about here. Let me say the quiet part out loud. AI model building is a money trap. What you are seeing here is a feature of modern AI models. There is no bounding law like Moore's law, where advances can predictably be expected. Nor has any model builder adequately publicly explained what to expect sans jargon and BS. What this means is that it's very difficult to plan spending programs to create advances, and will likely render entire months and possibly years of energy, hardware, R&D, OPEX, and CAPEX wasted and useless as new innovations are discovered. Open source is the clear winner. Closed source will be forced to keep their best models secret and sell to enterprises, or try and create some incredible consumer app with it. Having done this before, my lived experience is that it's easier said than done. Net consumers will win, many venture-funded efforts will not. So this is actually really interesting, because essentially what he's saying, or my understanding of what he's saying, is that anybody who's sort of trying to create these new AI startups, when you have essentially when you're looking at building in the AI space through just pumping more money to the problems and thinking that is going to produce a winning result, it's kind of dead in the water already. And open source, I have also been noticing that open source is becoming more and more popular, right? And this is where Deepseek is winning. Because I think a lot of people think that if you do open source, it's free. There are still really valid models for open source that work. Right there, you have, I think, I believe it's Red Hat and a few other companies who have really good open source models that have been highly profitable. I think Bolt also. So if you're not familiar with Bolt.new, these guys, I think, let's have a look here. Right, so Bolt.new, search from thousands of GitHub project launcher directly on Bolt.new. Okay, so I'm going to open up Bolt.new so you can see. All All right. So this is Bolt.new, and essentially it's an AI-based IDE where essentially you can build apps, code in the editor within the browser, and it actually work. And they've done something that a lot of others haven't in the space, whereby they've created an agent that is better at handling a lot of errors than their competitors. And they did so in a way that justified paying a lot more money, despite there being, other competitors out, and proving that there is a way to have something that is people will pay for, but also offer an open source version. So Bolt has an open source version of its platform or software that is looked at and reviewed on GitHub by many others, where I think their team is always just a bit ahead and offer the cloud services to allow people to use it. And I think having both of those is something that Bolt does excel in. All right. So I'm going through here for Bolt. You can now open public repos in Bolt.new. Yeah, I think they've just got like a really good setup, and I think it's one to take a look at. And because they're AI based, it's really about paying attention to the token generation inside apps like Bolt. And what Chamath was saying, again going back to this tweet, is that when you make things open, it's just going to accelerate the popularity, the development, and the appeal of these cheaper and more affordable models. So I personally think that Chamath is right, that I think open source will be the winner. It won't be for everybody, but I think it will help push the competition. It'll show that maybe all that sort of the billions of dollars of investment, like what the US is doing, might not necessarily make it more competitive or even better in terms of performance than the Chinese models that are coming out with open source, right? And to me, this has always been like a really interesting sort of dance between chess and Go. And I've talked about this in the past, whereby essentially chess is the game that the United States plays, and Go is essentially the game that China plays. And I think this is a great visualization right here. I'm going to open this up of the two strategies, right, between chess and Go. So while the United States is, looking at just pumping more money and thinking that will keep them ahead, it's still a very American approach. Go big or go home, right? But our world operates in cycles and seasons. And so there's a time to go big or go home, but there's a time to also sometimes be a lot more nuanced and have finesse, right, strategy. And so Go, you can see here, the amount of moves that are possible in a game like Go outnumber the amount of moves that you will find in chess. And I think China is playing Go with the United States or the world, while the United States is still playing chess and thinking that the Chinese are playing it as well. And this is the thing about life in general, right? It's that you have to be aware of the games that you are playing, learn the rules, and then make sure that you're playing the same game as others. But if you're not, then you really do have to rethink things. So with that, going back to our original tweet, I think Deepseek is a great player in the AI space, especially with its open source model. Is proving that through open source they can have something that is as competitive, if not more, than what is being produced in the West with lots of money and investment. And I think what we're seeing with sort of the flock of users from American apps over to Chinese apps and technologies is showing how trust and the perception of the two players are changing. And it makes you think about like the American dream. Was it always just that, a dream? Or is that something that can still be aspirational for many and provide a sort of new golden era, as Trump has talked about, for the future by going back to the United States' own roots and starting from there versus trying to do things that other people are better at or suited to. With that, hope you found this interesting. If you have any comments, as I mentioned earlier, please share them below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And with that, if you want to hear any more tips or insights on things across, tech, culture, or community, please just follow along, and we'll speak soon.